What if the greatest catastrophe in human history wasn't a single war, a single plague, or a single tyrant, but a process that unfolded quietly over centuries and was later renamed progress? In 1492, the Americas were not an empty land waiting to be discovered. They were home to tens of millions of people, complex civilizations, languages, spiritual systems, and economies that had evolved over thousands of years. 4 centuries later, up to 50 to 100 million of those people were gone. So here's the uncomfortable question. Was this the largest genocide in human history, or merely an unfortunate side effect of history moving forward? Diseases spread faster than armies. Forced labor broke bodies before weapons did. Cultures were erased not only through violence, but through laws, religion, borders, and schools. Entire nations vanished without a single official declaration of war. And yet, for generations this story was told as exploration, settlement, and civilization. Why were these deaths minimized or ignored altogether? Who gets to decide whether mass death counts as genocide? And why does this history still make people uncomfortable today? This isn't just about the past. The legacy of what happened between 1492 and 1900 still shapes land ownership, racial hierarchies, national myths, and global power structures right now. The consequences didn't end when the killing stopped. They were institutionalized. If millions can disappear from history books, what else have we chosen not to see? This video isn't about assigning simple blame or rewriting history with modern emotions. It's about confronting a scale of loss so vast that it challenges how we understand humanity itself. Because if we can't face the darkest foundations of the modern world, how can we ever claim to have learned from them? Before 1492, the Americas were home to millions, organized into thousands of nations and tribes. These societies spanned from the Arctic to the Amazon, each with its own language, beliefs, and way of life. Civilizations like the Haudenosaunee Confederacy in the northeast and the ancestral Puebloans in the southwest built complex political systems and cities aligned with the stars. Native peoples were skilled astronomers, engineers, and farmers, cultivating crops like corn, beans, and squash. Their relationship with the land was rooted in respect and sustainability, viewing the earth as a living relative. Trade networks connected distant regions, exchanging goods like shells and obsidian, as well as ideas and stories. The Americas were a dynamic, interconnected world, rich in culture and knowledge. These societies were not isolated or primitive. They rivaled the complexity of those in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Art, science, and intricate social structures flourished. The land was not empty, but alive with diverse civilizations. This vibrant world was about to face a profound and catastrophic change. The arrival of outsiders would alter the course of history forever. The stage was set for a collision that would reshape the continent. Columbus's arrival in 1492 triggered a catastrophic collision between worlds. The Americas, once home to up to 100 million people, saw their populations decimated within centuries. By 1900, only about 250,000 Native Americans remained in the U.S., a loss of up to 95%. This was not a natural decline, but a genocide fueled by colonization. Disease, warfare, enslavement, and forced relocation all contributed to this devastation. The drive for land and resources led to the systematic destruction of native lives and cultures. The loss was not just of people, but of languages, knowledge, and entire worlds. This tragedy is a fundamental part of American history, often overlooked but essential to understand. To grasp our present, we must confront the magnitude of this great dying. The deadliest force unleashed on native peoples was invisible: European diseases. Smallpox, measles, and influenza swept through communities with no immunity, wiping out entire villages in weeks. The loss of elders meant the loss of generations of wisdom and tradition. Epidemics left societies vulnerable to further violence and conquest. Sometimes disease was weaponized, like the infamous use of smallpox-infected blankets during Pontiac's War. These plagues cleared the way for European expansion, making colonization easier. The empty lands settlers found were often emptied by recent epidemics. Disease was the grim vanguard of conquest, shattering native worlds before soldiers arrived. Disease was devastating, but violence and warfare were relentless tools of colonization. Europeans brought firearms and steel, giving them a brutal advantage. Wars like the Pequot War set a precedent for targeting entire native communities. The U.S. Army's westward campaigns aimed not just to defeat, but to exterminate or subjugate. Policies targeted food sources, villages burned, buffalo herds slaughtered, to starve native peoples into submission. Massacres like Sand Creek in 1864, where over 200 Cheyenne and Arapaho were killed, were part of a broader strategy. The philosophy of "the only good Indian is a dead Indian" guided military actions. These were not isolated incidents, but systematic efforts to break native resistance. The goal forced native nations onto reservations and seized their lands. Warfare, attrition, and terror dismantled native societies. The sword and gun were used to erase resistance and claim territory. The Indian Wars left a legacy of trauma and loss. The conquest was as much about annihilation as it was about expansion. The law became a weapon for dispossession. The U.S. signed hundreds of treaties with native nations, recognizing their sovereignty on paper. These treaties were sacred to native peoples, but often ignored or broken by the government. As settlers encroached, new treaties forced more land cessions in a cycle of promise and betrayal. Legal doctrines like manifest destiny and the doctrine of discovery justified land theft. By 1871, the U.S. stopped making treaties, treating native peoples as wards of the state. The Dawes Act of 1887 broke up communal lands, transferring millions of acres to white settlers. The result: native nations lost nearly all their land base. The law meant to civilize became another tool for taking land. Dispossession was written into the very fabric of American policy. Forced removal became federal policy as settlers coveted native lands in the Southeast. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 authorized the government to relocate entire nations west of the Mississippi. The 5 civilized tribes, despite adopting American customs, were targeted for removal. The Cherokee Trail of Tears in 1838-39 epitomized this tragedy. 17,000 people forced from their homes, thousands dying from disease, starvation, and exposure. Families were marched over 1,000 miles in brutal conditions. Over 4,000 Cherokees died. Other tribes faced similar fates, enduring death marches and internment camps. These removals were acts of ethnic cleansing, clearing land for white settlement. The suffering was immense, the losses incalculable. The memory of these trails is etched in Native history. Forced relocation was not an isolated event, but a deliberate policy. The cost was measured in lives, cultures, and homelands lost. The Trail of Tears remains a symbol of state-sponsored violence. By the late 1800s, most native nations were confined to reservations, their ways of life shattered. In this climate, the ghost dance movement arose, a peaceful spiritual revival promising hope and restoration. The U.S. government, fearing rebellion, responded with violence. The killing of Sitting Bull in 1890 heightened tensions. Fleeing violence, a band of Lakota led by Spotted Elk sought refuge only to be intercepted by the U.S. 7th Cavalry. At Wounded Knee Creek, soldiers surrounded the camp and attempted to disarm the Lakota. A shot rang out, and the military unleashed a massacre. Over 300 Lakota, mostly women and children, were killed. The dead were left in the snow for days before burial in a mass grave. Wounded Knee was not a battle, but a massacre marking the end of the Indian Wars. The U.S. Army suffered few casualties, many from friendly fire. The massacre symbolized the brutal suppression of Native resistance. The Ghost Dance's hope was met with tragedy. Wounded Knee closed a bloody chapter in American history. Despite overwhelming odds, Native peoples never surrendered their identity or dignity. Resistance took many forms: armed struggle, legal battles, and cultural perseverance. Leaders like Tecumseh, Crazy Horse, and Chief Joseph became symbols of defiance. The Cherokee fought removal in the Supreme Court, winning Worcester versus Georgia, though the victory was ignored. Cultural survival was perhaps the greatest resistance. Languages, ceremonies, and stories were kept alive in secret. Even as government policies aimed to erase Native identity, traditions endured. This quiet defiance ensured the survival of Native nations. The spirit of resistance carried their heritage into the future. Survival itself became an act of defiance. The legacy of colonization is not just history, it shapes Native life today. The loss of land and culture created deep, intergenerational trauma. Social, economic, and health disparities in Native communities are direct results of this history. The fight to preserve language and culture continues, with tribes leading revitalization efforts. The scars of forced assimilation and boarding schools remain, but so does resilience. Native nations are asserting sovereignty, defending treaty rights, and leading in fields from art to law. The population, once near extinction, is growing. The story is one of survival and resurgence. Native voices are rising, reclaiming their place in the continent's story. Their history, however tragic, is vital to understanding America today.